We're going to talk with a few startup panels here today. Startup founders, early employees, chatting about their businesses and some of the challenges in growing an early stage company in this space, as well as observations on innovation. So maybe just to kick it off to give context here for everyone in the room, a really quick introduction on yourself and then the company you're with, and throw in a fun fact of the best vacation you've had in the last few years.
All right. Start with me?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
All right. So I'm Daniel Spillane. I'm the head of sales at Skillit. I'm one of the earliest employees there. We are a craft hiring platform. So think of us sort of like a LinkedIn, but for the trades, where you can, create your own profile and show everything you're capable of, but without the social aspect to it. In terms of a great vacation recently, I'd say I'm turning this into a vacation. I think I'm going to walk on the edge of the CN Tower.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I think I'm going to do that Saturday. So that'll be
good on you.
Yeah, good things come.
Steve Dell'Orto, CEO, founder of ConCntric. We are an end-to-end comprehensive pre-construction platform. Big vision to ultimately make the built world more affordable, sustainable, and predictable. So we're on a long-term mission here to really make a dent in this industry.
My name's Cameron Page. I'm the CEO and founder of Clearstory. We're a change order communication tool. Like Steve and Gabe, my background's commercial construction. So I started in the trades when I was 17 and studied construction management in college. And the idea behind Clearstory was really built out of my experience as a project manager. I wanted to understand where I stood on costs in real time. As a GC, it's mostly change orders. And to do that, I had to do a bunch of manual work. And so that was the big idea behind Clearstory, was to create a common platform and network so contractors can share out of contract work. And we work with large general contractors, specialty contractors, as well as SMB subcontractors as well. So
Vacation,
yeah. Startup founders, we don't take a ton of vacation, but I also have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So my vacations are all things like Legoland and stuff like that these days.
nice.
So yeah, that's probably been the most exciting I've done recently.
Legoland.
Yeah, it's great for 3-year-olds.
Gabe, Guetta, CEO and co-founder of SALUS. We're safety management software for general contractors and subcontractors in construction. As Cam said, my background's in construction. I started as a laborer at 18 and worked my way up in that industry. Specialized in window installation and high rises. I ran a company for a few years doing that. And then the evolution around health and safety and the enforcement around that changed the way that we ran our business, and it caused an extreme amount of pain. And an incident drove us to change. And through that change, SALUS was born. And excited to chat more about this in the panel. But my best vacation was probably 3 months ago. It's my wife's 40th this year, and I surprised her with a trip to Sedona, and we went to do a bunch of hiking. We did Grand Canyon and Sedona, and that was unbelievable.
Wow.
That sounds about right. Yeah. Not as good as Legoland. But.
Yeah, not everyone can do it.
Nothing beats Legoland.
We can all dream.
It wouldn't be a place for a 40th birthday.
I don't know. You don't know my wife. She might love it.
Francesco, Iorio. I'm the founder and CEO of Augmenta. We are a software startup. We write artificial intelligence tools to automate building engineering for the most part. So our grand vision is to actually have the ability to design, buildings top to bottom automatically, or as automatically as possible, if you will, right? So, but right now we focus on MEP engineering, right? So by essentially automating the design of BIM models from scratch. And my best vacation over the last few months has been actually last week, as I went back home. Actually, I'm originally from Italy. The mountains, actually Alps, and so actually kind of a small kind of trek to one of the lodges at the top of mountains is actually a highlight of the of the last few months.
Wow.
Awesome.
Jealous.
That's still not as good as Legoland.
No, not really.
I'm going to Portland, Maine next week, so I'll take recommendations for my summer trip. So look, I think what's really cool on this panel is you have a collection of folks that spent careers in the industry and have fresh eyes to the industry, right? And maybe Francesco, to kick this off, there's no right way to start a startup in this space, right? Fresh eyes, experienced eyes, built by builders. I think Steve is a great term that you often use. But what are this, maybe Francisco started through, what are some of the lessons learned as you found the construction industry and started, building product for this space?
Absolutely. I think the biggest lesson learned is it's humility, right? So I come from computer science. So for me, construction it has been very foreign actually for most of my life and my career. But I was lucky enough that I worked actually in advanced manufacturing, so software for advanced manufacturing for 15 years, right? So before approaching construction. So essentially the lesson really is to listen a lot, right? So to actually be very humble and to understand, to actually equip yourself with the right partners, right? So that way, I think even an outsider like myself actually has a chance to actually make it in construction, right? So, but going in with eyes wide open and kind of knowing that there is so much nuance, right? So there's so much peculiarity in the construction industry that you just have to, you have to be able to listen a lot.
And maybe just like the flip side of the coin, building product is different than building a physical building. What are some of the early kind of observations or lessons learned that are good? Maybe Gabe, Cam, Steve, et cetera.
I can add to what you were saying as well. I think building a product is different than building a building, but going to what you're saying, coming from the industry or not from the industry and solving problems for an industry, I find it's a double-edged sword. So there's a lot of benefits for me coming from the industry. I can connect with our customer very quickly and speak the same language within a few words and understand the problem they're looking to solve. The problem I've found is that I can also be the problem because we think the same way and we're not really going to break the mold on innovation because we're in a box whether we like it or not. So some of the stuff that we've done at SALUS is we'll identify these problems, which we can have incredible collaborative conversations with our customers. There's a lot of trust there because we're speaking the same language. Then we'll actually take that problem and give it to our team that comes from outside the industry. A lot of them are software developers and say, how do we solve this problem? We're not going to tell you the solution. You come to us with the solutions. And from that, we've been able to solve problems in ways that the industry didn't know was possible by introducing those two different perspectives, which I found has been incredibly powerful.
That's exactly how we operate as well. Like we brought in, it's mostly people on our team are from outside of the industry. We have guys that are from the industry, but it's those collaborations with the early customers to be like, sit down with us, give us your time, and we'll build the thing that you need, that you tell us that you need. We have like a Disney Imagineer on our team, our head of product. Who would have thought he'd be in this space? But he's taking what he learned there and applying it to a group, that knows the space very well and, can explain it to him in such a way that he can translate it into actual product.
Yeah, great conversations come from those.
Yeah, we've got a fantastic blend, people that are from within the industry, as well as people that are doing, have been doing SaaS platforms.
That's really
completely unrelated. So you're getting the best of both worlds because the industry does need to evolve and to change. But the risk that we run is if we go too far too fast, particularly like right out of the gate, you have to kind of bring it along incrementally. So that's a bit of our methodology on how we develop the product on the platform. Start with something that's familiar, but it's more advanced. I mean, it's not hard to be more advanced in Excel, but you're just familiar enough, but advanced enough to where they're actually seeing the power of something more modern. And then from there, iterate and expand, because then you can take them places, take your own company places that the industry today just doesn't really know what's possible.
That's gentle disruption.
Gentle disruption.
right.
Gentle. Because fundamentally, a lot of what we're doing as professionals in our industry isn't broken. I mean, these are best practices that people are following, but oftentimes it just is lacking a technology support that's in keeping with the 21st century. So
Efficiency.
you just got to marry those two carefully.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the problem you're trying to solve for the industry. Like, I don't think me as a former project manager should go build a robotics company. Like, I wouldn't know what the hell I was doing, and I don't think I'd add the right kind of value. Like, somebody from technology who deeply understands robotics should go build that technology to then go find the problem, the use case to solve. Whereas, the problem I solved was a problem I lived, right? And so I had conviction around, I knew it was a problem. And, in the early days, it's really important to have that conviction around what you're doing, because early you're going to get kicked in the mouth quite a bit on sales calls and things like that. And being able to have conviction and keep going is really important. And I think a lot of people who don't come from the industry get kicked in the mouth, they get objections, and then they pivot their product and they try and find that fit, and it can lead them down sometimes negative paths. And so I think it just depends on what you're building, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely. As in, like, sometimes actually I find when I talk to people from industry that have deep roots, right? So sometimes there's kind of scarce perceptions of sometimes what computers can do, right? So like it's just so far beyond some people's imagination, right? So, but sometimes again, there's an excess of of zeal, if you will, right? So there's even from myself or a computer scientist, right? Sometimes you try to fit a technology to a problem, right? So and that doesn't work, right? So it's really striking this balance and getting the best people from both worlds actually talking to each other and hopefully and possibly under the same roof whenever possible, right? So, but if not, again,
under the
deep
same
partnership,
Zoom, yeah.
correct, under the, like very very closely connected.
So like there's really like flies out of this conversation is this integration of skill sets is so key, right? And building that trust is so key. Taking a step back, it's not uncommon. Cam shared that the kick in the teeth thing is like, if you don't use the right lingo, the right time at the right project, right, you're kind of, you get dismissed quickly in our industry, right? And it's like an industry of code words, right? And secret handshakes. And that's challenging, right? But I think that's changing more readily today than it was a decade ago, right? The pace of change must continue, right? Adoption is still happening, relative infancy and growing quite a bit. What are some observations you've had or tips or tricks that you've seen to get people's guard to come down from your client side or your collaborator side in product development, to be willing to change, to be willing to share their information and their pain point, not their solution?
I mean, we have pretty open dialogue right out of the gate, and we have not found too much in the way of customers holding back. If you actually ask them, you go through a really good discovery-oriented conversation, they're pretty readily giving up what are their pain points, what are their priorities, where are they currently at, and then they're just looking for something in kind that is going to solve their problem. You have to be careful to differentiate who you're going to invest your time in, because there are laggards out there and they'll take a lot of time and it won't really get anywhere. But for the most part, I've personally seen just in my career, when I was running a big division at Clark Construction, we were thawing out and embracing technology more and more. And I think that holds true over the last 10 years. We have a long way to go, but the momentum is there. But I think with an open conversation, drawing out what their problems so they feel that they're heard before you start really shoving down their throat what you're there to sell them on.
Yeah, and to your point before too, I think that's the most critical thing, is that it's collaborative and it's incremental. We've had times where we sold to a team and it just revolutionizes the way they're doing it, and they really step back and they're like, we want nothing to do with this. I think if anyone was here for the last panel that was here, Beta brought up a great point and you just touched on it as well. It's like finding those teams that really love innovation and really want to lean in and will spend the time with you, and then making a case study out of them. So we had trouble getting our software into the field, but once we found someone who's willing to do it, that became the case study, and like it quickly grew, and we're able to basically cookie cutter that and bring it to other teams and be like, look, this is why you should be doing this. Look at the results that they've had. So I think it's, like, to your point, like, find those people that want to lean in and really lean back and take advantage for life.
And you said something there that like maybe cues up an interesting observation is 90% of the product today is built for an office, but 80+% of people work in a trailer in the field, right? There's this deviation between innovation and where the workforce is. Gabe, obviously, it's a space you've spent a lot of time in. Like, how do you enable or change that dynamic, or where do you see as some ways to change that ratio, right?
Yeah, I think I'll add to that last one and tie into this. I think it depends on where you are in your startup. As you listen to customers, a lot of companies in construction don't fully understand how SaaS software works. So when you want that collaboration, it's great. You can get it at the early stage, and then you have fast iterations and they see that you're listening. But then all of a sudden you have 25 customers. That becomes a little harder. Then you have 50, then you have 100, then you have 500. And so now you're having to try and create an environment where you have that same relationship and impact, but you cannot build everything that people want. So now you have to start looking at things at an industry level. Now you have to start looking at things where customers will come to you and say, hey, this is the feature that we need. And you have to start pulling the thread and go backwards and say, okay, well, what's the problem? How did you get to that? And when you pull it back to the problem, you start solving things at an industry level. And 1,000 feature requests or capability requests will boil down to 20. And so, but still finding a way where you can have direct impact with your customers and they feel like they're a part of your journey, it's not easy. And a lot of that is communication on how you sell, how you support, and everything else, because it's a very different world. And then going into the field level side, it's hard. I mean, 80% of the field is, or 80% of the construction is the field. Software, a lot of it is in the office. And I always say software breaks at the field level of construction because it's not as sexy. We're not like AI, all the great, amazing stuff that's being built. The thing that kept me up at night when we were building software for field level construction workers was having 30 field level workers in a room needing to get orientated within 1 minute. That was like, that's crazy. Some of them will not download a mobile app. They don't have email addresses, they only have phone numbers. They're on site with an iPhone 6. And we have to find a way to get them into our system with a profile under the company that they're in and get them to start adopting technology. There's nothing sexy about that, but that's the barrier that you have to cross in order to serve that space. And so for the last 6 years, we've been living and breathing that. And in order to win in that world, you have to meet them at the level that we're at. And you have to make sure that it's as easy to use as a piece of paper. So if your technology is not as easy to use as a piece of paper, you will lose. Yes, there's so much benefit that comes out of it being digital, but if you can't take a piece of paper or your phone into a parkade, out of a parkade, with cell service, without cell service, have one company sign that piece of paper or your phone and then pass it to another company, there's so many barriers in this technical world that don't exist in the physical workflows of construction. And so our mandate is always, we have to replicate the physical workflows. In an office, they're not physical workflows, they're virtual. And so our goal is to break down these barriers constantly. Offline, great. What are all the nuances around that? We have to make sure our technology can mimic that or you'll never win. And that's where once you start doing that, we're getting more and more adoption. You unlock so many different things. Like you don't have a mobile app. Okay, there's a progressive web app where you don't need an email address. You can have a phone number and everything else and slowly get more and more people using the software and it starts bridging that gap. And then the data that starts coming out of the field, you start pulling those worlds together in a way that hasn't been done before.
I mean, fundamentally, I think our job as providing technology for the industry is to make less work, not more. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a mantra that we have because ultimately, whether it's in the field, in the office, or you're doing the front end pre-construction work, nobody's going to want to do something that's going to add to their workload. Everybody's, over the top anyway with work. So it's not as easy as it sounds either. So you've got to really work hard at making things simple, making things intuitive. But if you do, it's just the payoff in terms of how happy the rate of adoption, how the customer engages with your platform just goes, through the roof. It's fantastic.
And so like the KISS principle, big, right?
Big.
And the replicate physical familiar activity, big. Maybe Cam, start with you. What other ways were you able to get client engagement, right? Keeping it simple and replicating what's familiar isn't necessarily get engagement right off the bat. What other ways did you in your journey get clients to really engage and advocate for Clearstory?
Yeah, I mean, keep it simple is one of our 4 core values of our companies, and for the same reason that Gabe just described. I will quickly, though, challenge a little bit of that statistic around 90% of the software is in the office. Like, that's because of the lay of the land, right? Mm-hmm. And we use a framework of peaks and potholes when we think about our product roadmap. So what are the potholes we need to go solve that are not sexy in our product but are going to make it better for our customers? And then what are the peaks that we can add functionality and wow them and push ourselves forward? And I think you can use that same framework for the construction industry, right? Like there are potholes in our industry that are not sexy that we should go solve. Like we solved one of them. I think these guys solve other ones. And then peaks are things like robots and machine learning and all these other amazing things that we need and will keep us pushing forward. But we have to strike that balance between, I think, peaks and potholes. And I think so much of the office-based workflows are just such low-hanging fruit to disrupt because they are computer-based yet manual. And that's the easiest thing for software to disrupt. So like you're always going to have, I think, more innovation where it's easier rather than where it's harder out in the field, which it is harder. And yeah, our same framework is keep it simple. A big part of our software is digital T&M tickets. Like 99% of the industry still does it on triplicate carbon copy paper. So that's a big part of our software, is to digitize that process so everyone understands the risk associated with T&M work instantly, which was the bane of my existence as a project manager. But one of our initial questions is like, oh, our field's never going to be able to adopt that, right? And so I think the key is, taking a step back, working with whoever's part of that central leadership team and creating a business case and an ROI, making it really simple for them to go communicate that ROI to their teams so they understand like the why behind them making the change. But then beyond that, to Gabe's point, like it is our responsibility as a software provider to make it easy for your field teams to use software. And that's both literally the software itself, making it, as few clicks as possible, as easy to use as possible. But then providing training, and not just training, like we have a SOP that we have a template for, and they can take it and edit it and customize it to their business. And, we'll take a consultative approach to really like walk them through that and make sure it's not just going to get them to the point of buying the software, but get them to the point of renewing. Like for a SaaS business, there's a point of conversation in your last panel. We do charge a subscription revenue, but the beauty of that is like we have to uphold our end of the bargain every single year and keep making the software more valuable. So like it's a reciprocal process where like we have to keep making the software better for you guys to keep using it and keep getting value out of it. And as soon as we don't do that, you should churn, right? And that's where the incentives align really well. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, no, well, my stats were poorly researched in this. Swagged right now, so don't hold me on that.
stats are good, but you always gotta,
Well, there's
look a little
lies,
further.
damn lies, and statistics, right?
Yeah.
So, maybe just to pivot for a sec, and Daniel, I saw you writing down quite a few things here. Well, actually, I was gonna continue on this field versus office and like the handoff between each, but I saw you write down a few things. I want to give you the floor if maybe pick up from where Cam was going.
Yeah, I think a couple of things I noted was like Gabe's point around making less work for them. Everyone's already filled to here with work, especially for us. We're increasingly in the hands of site supers who are kind of hooked on the idea of like when they're sourcing for labor, asking around the job site. Referrals are huge. Some of our customers have told us they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on referral bonuses. Whereas we're starting to get into the hands of supers who can, pull out their phone, tap a couple, characteristics that they want and find that exact person. And so, but like we're running into the whole thing that Cameron was bringing up as well, which is like, you can't just sell it and expect that everyone's going to adopt it because it's easy to use, because it's easier and it's faster and it creates a better outcome for them. We have to do like a bit of a roadshow and continuous training and, like I mentioned before, like finding someone who's going to be your advocate, finding that not just the customer who has someone who truly gets what you're doing, and will work with you, but will also work with you to find someone on site who will also be that person who will then transform it. So like they're the one person on site doing it, and then he's telling 5 friends, and it winds up everywhere. And then capturing all of those results so that you can bring them to other customers and say, look what we've done for your competition. If you don't do the same, you're basically going to get left behind.
Right.
And it's just sharing the insights that you can get from doing it that way rather than hoping for the best with referrals or traditional methods.
I think it's really, we were chatting earlier, Hamad, with Ellis Don made this observation, takes 2 to 3 times as many touch points to sell SaaS in construction versus any other industry, right? Yeah. So the average is 9 touch points globally. So his swag was, hey, you gotta be talking to 20 plus people, And I think it's, it's not a stat. Clarity.
I think that one's
to that though.
Yeah, but it feels about right, So I'll talk with my feelings here, and so yeah. Go.
I'm gonna add one thing to it. So one of the things with the construction is complicated, right? It's very different than most industries. We actually have great adoption, and it's not quite as difficult. When you take one individual company, get your product down to the field, that's actually progressing quite well. Where it gets really hard is on a job site. You're not dealing with your own company. You're dealing with subcontracted companies. You're dealing with workers you've never met before, a lot of times, coming in and interacting with the product. And I think that is the hardest part of software in the field level of construction, is you're not implementing. And yeah, sure, GCs have a lot of power. They can say everyone has to use this, but it's not the same impact as your own business. That's where it really gets hard. That's where, when I'm saying, like, you have people with who knows what phone, who knows where their phone number's even from.
Right.
And that's where it gets really complicated.
And when you do it well, that's product-led growth, right? Because that's
You do it well,
resource
and
network.
yes, but it is, yeah. I mean, that's where we excel, but it is very complex and hard.
And maybe just to kind of, Francisco, pivot to you and tie it back to Steve too. Steve, you talked about gentle disruption, right? Like, how do you move the needle enough to be worth investing in technology?
Yeah.
And then, this conversation here is, how do you move the needle enough that people spread the good word, right? Like they have to go hand in glove, and that's a very delicate balance. Francisco, you and I had a conversation earlier about incentives in our industry, and like, who's the right person to be adopting
Absolutely.
for success? Like, how do you frame like that right fit as you're on the earlier side of the kind of broad scale commercialization of your platform, and how you kind of think about these different dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated. Again, I wanted to kind of challenge slides a bit, that it's much easier to sell actually in the office. I mean, as in, it is easier, but kind of marginally so, because of saturation right now, right? And also staying power that these folks actually kind of demand, right? So it's much simpler if you're already a kind of established incumbent, rather than actually being a new entrant in a startup, right? Especially if you're coming from outside of the field, right? So the approach is actually kind of very nuanced, right? So social proof is everything, really, right? So essentially, to your points, right? So essentially, anything that can be translated directly into a use case, a scenario, right? So something that kind of showcases your technology's ability, or your approach's ability to actually generate value, right? So is really fundamental, right? So on the other side, again, it's just very challenging to break in at the beginning, right? So like opening the door, the first few doors, right? So is really the hardest part, right? So once you have, again, the social proof, and you actually have the minimum traction, right? So then actually it's much simpler, right? So, and I've seen this actually happen in other fields as well, right? In aerospace, tools of this magnitude, for example, for design, which is where we operate, the particular piece of the puzzle that we operate in, right? So design cycles actually last decades, right? So in that industry, right? So, and in construction, of course, projects are much faster than that, but it looks like the tooling itself, kind of crystallizes.
Except rail.
Fair enough. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, infrastructure. Yeah, large infrastructure. Well, in Toronto, like I'm local here from Toronto, right? So there's a project here that is
Not so
infamous, as it's kind of biblical times. Anyway, so what I'm saying is but that actually revolves also into again the quality that you have to show as your staying power. Right. So software is actually often seen, we were having this conversation earlier, right? So as something that is much more volatile, right? So that Bosch or Milwaukee, I mean, they're going to be available to you, at the end of your project for sure, probably for the next 30 projects, right? So a software company that especially you've never seen, right? So, and of which you can see probably many around, right? So that knock on your door and call you, right? So it's harder to take that risk, right? So having, again, proof, having insurance, again, being very humble once again, right? So, and this actually has to do with gentle disruption. Actually, you have to go in very candidly understanding that you're asking them to take a risk, no matter what, like no matter how good kind of your new solution, your new approach is, it's a risk nonetheless, because it's worked before, right? So what they've been doing actually so far is worked before, right? So you have to be very, very respectful, right? So we call it kind of respectful disruption, right? So rather than gentle, but it's the same thing, right? So you have to really form the people's opinion kind of step by step, right? So like honing in the value as you go, right? So going in, tiptoes, and then eventually, and then demonstrating the value progressively.
Yeah.
The challenge, some of this a little bit though, is that I think there's some misconceptions around the construction industry as a whole, how things are adopted, how do you sell it, the strategies involved, because I mean, we've been hearing field versus office as if those were just the two elements of the construction industry. But in fact, you have the design.
Oh, yes.
You also have the front end group, which is not the office in the context that we've been talking about here. That's more like project management in the construction phase. So each of these groups are different personas. Your strategy on how you're going to approach a company, or it's going to depend on that persona and where they occupy in that space, because you may have to sell at the field level involving subcontractors, and that strategy and the way you go about it is going to be entirely different than coming in and selling to the person that has a problem that's kind of global across all projects, and they're looking for a solution that will solve all their pre-construction planning needs across 30 or 40 projects that they're juggling at any given time, not one project at a time. So,
and maybe Steve, like just to pull that string a little more, right? You know, because you obviously have pre-con, the lifeblood of a GC, right? Operations, right? And then of course administration of the company. Those are the three big buckets. So, you've seen a lot of how folks design, their big partnerships versus startup partnerships, and like that mix across those functions. I mean, what are some observations that you've seen as best practices or just good ideas from how you've seen clients frame that mix across different phases and mix a big company, little company?
yeah, I mean, it does vary. I think, it should be viewed as a partnership, right? You're in there, you're not just selling a widget. You're really selling what needs to be a long-term partnership in the use, the development of your software or your solution. But in doing that, I think both sides have to meet in the middle in many ways, right? We're going to come and commit to supporting your needs, and, bring you in oftentimes to help shape where we take the new features and whatnot, which I think is an incredible opportunity for the buyer, the customer, because they have their way of doing things, but I think they have a notion of, hey, perfection or the promised land looks like this. It's something different than what I can do in Excel, but I don't know where to take that. Well, you just opened up the door as a partner, letting them in. We have we're starting to get better at having more open dialogue about a commitment, right? They have to commit.
That's right.
That if they're going to invest and buy into us, they've got to prioritize it. They have to have the right people and the resources to truly adopt and use and be an active participant. And I think it makes a big difference to have a lot of that, whether it's a small company, even more importantly, the bigger they get, you really have to have these frank conversations, because they're up against it. They're really, really, really busy, and they get a lot thrown at them, not software wise, but just tasks in any given day. And spend time with somebody that isn't about, I got to respond to an RFP or I got to solve a crisis out on the job site. You clearly are going to get bounced.
Yeah.
So, if it's a priority and it's something that they're equally engaged in, as are we, that's been a winning, that's a winning recipe for us.
Right. Turns out dewatering a basement is a little more urgent.
Yeah.
It's funny how the analogy here, like manpower, materials, and like timeline are like kind of like and equipment. If you're doing heavy civil, it's like the mix, And it's funny because your observation here is very similar, right?
Yep.
They have to have the manpower, the priority, and the capital to be a good partner.
That's right.
I think it's really, really thoughtful. Maybe Cam, as you think about integration and participating with some of the bigger, primarily field operations folks like Procore, but also back office, CMIC, HCSS, how do you think about partnering with other parts of the value chain through integrations or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think, there's integrations, and then there's also data and data integrity and data hygiene and stuff like that. And I think a lot of those things are very related, but a lot of times they get mixed up. And I think ultimately integrations should be purpose built because there's a business case behind the integration. And then data, like you don't need an integration to share data. There's a bunch of different data strategies you can employ to like make sure your data all lives in the same place and it talks to each other and stuff like that. So I think sometimes those things get confused, but I do think, our industry is going through a phase now of things becoming more integrated, and every industry goes through like bundling and unbundling and waves of that. My biggest learning was coming into the software industry. We'd used PlanGrid and we had Prolog for financials, and we had scheduling tool, and we had I don't know, probably 7 or 8 pieces of software we used on a project management basis. Coming into a software company, we probably have, and we're a 65-person company, we probably have 65 different pieces of software that we use. And it's interesting coming into a software industry and realizing how many purpose-built point solutions you use in order to get a competitive edge and beat your competitors and sell faster and grow faster. And I think, even in our industry, those tools don't integrate all that well, just being honest. Like we use HubSpot as our core CRM, and we have a bunch of integrations with that. But what we're learning is that the integrations don't work as well with Salesforce. And Salesforce, everyone considers their platform, but in order to use Salesforce, you have to plug in like 7 tools to it and build this like tech stack around it. And so I think our industry is starting to recognize that the platforms out there are great, and they're a great hub to like house and have a foundation for your processes. But to truly be operational excellent, you're going to need to tie in other solutions into that core product, especially if you want to have an edge over your competitors. And I think that we've gone through a journey working with those big companies. A lot of people heard, for us, and it's different with every company up here, but like for us, if you hear us on the surface level change order software, the CIO is like, oh no, I've already checked that box. Like we have software that does change orders, and then you actually dig into the workflow and you recognize that like 80% of the change order workflow happens in email, Excel spreadsheets, T&M tickets on the job site, and
Smoke signals,
flares, all sorts of stuff. And so with the incumbents in the space, it took them a while to understand who we were, and now we've developed really good partnerships. We have deep integrations with a lot of those solutions, and I think those companies are really starting to understand the benefit of partnering with maybe not every early stage company, but as companies hit certain inflection points, and these integrations become customer driven, it starts to make a lot of sense. So that's kind of the evolution we've seen.
Cool. We got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'd like to add maybe something actually to this point, because it's interesting, like we see on the kind of BIM side, right? So where this is actually slightly different, in fact, right? So there's a major amount of vendor lock-in, right? So like as in the large incumbents, the Sosystems, NVIDIA, Autodesk, Bentley Systems, right? So Siemens, etc., right? So they all have their own ecosystems for design, right? So for BIM at the very least, right? So, and interoperability is not an easy problem to solve, right? So talking to actually firms that deal with BIM or even 2D drawing, but certainly for BIM, right? So there's a strong desire to actually kind of break out of these kind of proprietary formats, proprietary infrastructures and platforms, right? And so there's like a motion towards integration and of smaller services and components, if you will, right? So even large developers, right, so are really kind of looking into breaking out their systems that they pay Autodesk Construction Cloud, others, right? So into kind of multiple kind of more fragmented services that they can replace and be more proactive with, right? On demand, right? So essentially, as the value progresses of each of these individual pieces, right? So that's an interesting dynamic, because it has not been the case for the last 30 years, right? So, but now there is quite a substantial kind of traction in that direction, right? So, which is kind of new from construction tech kind of perspective, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like anything, the pendulum swings, and it depends on which segment.
Absolutely,
right?
Correct.
Because in our group, in pre-con, they're looking at 30 to 40 different workflows of what comprises what they do to plan a given project over a 3-month or a 36-month period.
Of course.
And they're going, oh, if I'm confronted with 30 or 40 different point solutions, I don't know if I've really solved the problem. I've just replaced each Excel spreadsheet with something less manageable by me to get it to talk to the different things. So there's this gravitational pull towards a platform that will have bidirectional data exchanges and not be,
Yes.
closed environment, but they're really looking for like the mainstay anchor for the vast majority of what they're doing, which is easy to do for us because it's all largely still in Excel and you're replacing that. But when it comes to other pieces of software that do address a particular thing and being able to talk to it, it's finding that right balance of the overall platform with the ability to integrate
Yes.
very select pieces of software that are doing something unique. So I think it's going to depend on who the group is, the persona as a function, if you will, and what their needs are and where they are in that modernization journey. Because
That's right.
the construction phase has seen a lot more modernization than the front end of the business.
That's right.
I wonder if there's something to do with they went from licenses to SaaS fees.
There's that.
Something there.
There's that.
Questions from the audience?
So a lot of you came from within the field, construction field. Some of you came from outside the field. So for the people that came from within the field, I'll ask you in this sense, why, aside from the obvious reason that it was an easy transition to stick in the field, did you feel it was important to bet on construction in terms of dumping all your resources and starting a startup within construction? Why did you feel it was the best bet for you? And for the people that were from outside the field, why did you feel that construction was a big bet, dumping all those resources?
I did it for 26 years. I didn't know much else. So I really, when I made the choice, it was just really to draw upon all of my experience and the lessons I've learned, and really position that in a way that I could solve the problems that I was looking to solve for myself, my company, but to do it on a industry scale. I don't think there was much of a choice because when you do something for that long, you're not really geared to do anything else. I wasn't going to go pivot into insurance or something completely out of the industry.
They would have welcomed you with open arms.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, my story was pretty similar to that. I managed, subcontractors for a living, and I was like, what could be so hard about managing a group of software engineers? Like, I could totally do that. It's a design build process. We're going to build a product, and it turns out it's way harder and way different. I wouldn't say it's harder, but it's way different. And I, definitely struggled. But same as Steve, I mean, I worked for the largest general contractor in Silicon Valley, and if I was going through this challenge, I had this hypothesis that a lot of my peers were. Luckily, I studied construction management in college. A bunch of my college friends were at other general contractors, and I asked them if they were having the same challenge, and it turns out everyone does. And so the same thing, like, there would have been no competitive advantage for me going to try and start a software company in another space. I always wanted to do something entrepreneurial, and I love construction, so it was like just an obvious thing to go do. But yeah.
Yeah, for me, a little bit different. I mean, for me, going into software is the same as me becoming an astronaut. I mean, very different world. My VCs, some of our investors are here. They hate me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyways. When I started SALUS, I didn't own a laptop. I ran a 100-person company. I used a smartphone and sent out invoices once a month. So coming into this world was just as much a leap of faith as starting somewhere else. And then safety it transcends industries. So when we first started, sure, I started with my network in Alberta and BC in high-rise construction, but pretty quickly, all of a sudden, we had an oil and gas company. We had a funeral home. We have a brewery in North Carolina. And then realizing why we need to focus on what we need to focus for starters. And construction, I have a lot of passion towards construction. It's an amazing industry. There's so much that you can solve, and it's a big market as well. And so what we said is like, we're going to go all in, only safety and construction. So for us, it was like, we just started climbing the mountain, and then got to where we are today, where, yeah.
Fair enough. I'll do the flip side.
You owned a laptop, right?
Yeah, I did actually. I'm afraid, yes. But no smartphone. No, I had the smartphone as well. So for me, the journey was actually opposite in that I got the construction kind of bug. I've worked actually for 11 years at Autodesk actually. But essentially my background has been, for 20 years I've worked on software for computer-aided design, right? So and specifically design automation, right? So having worked actually for a long time in the manufacturing side of the world, right? So design automation, and having kind of solved that problem a little bit, or having kind of stuck my teeth. I looked at construction and I was just kind of shocked at the amazing opportunity. Like, as in, it just looks so compelling. Like, the software is so kind of primitive. I'm sorry, like, essentially relative to other fields, right? So, but not just as a business, right? So it's just that, like, construction really kind of touches everything, right? So they're just, I mean, everything around us is built, right? So much more so than products. And again, as much as I have a passion for manufacturing, just construction really kind of caught me by surprise, pretty much, right? So I hoped, and I still do, right? So that we can make a difference actually in this field, because it's just so fascinating. It's just so fascinating. So.
Yeah, I'm also from outside. And my primary driver was first learning about Skillit was for the worker, right? We're very much worker first. I've always had LinkedIn. I've always had a way to showcase how wonderful I am and all the things I can do. And these guys didn't have that. And I love talking to workers and having them be excited. Like, I have a place to put me and showcase what I can do and find great jobs. The other side of that, of course, is we have a skilled labor crisis. Like, there aren't people coming into the trade. It's hard to find the right people, and we believe it's largely a data problem of, like, knowing where those people are, who's capable of what, and just uncovering them. And so, giving construction companies the opportunity to find those people. And now, what we're starting to do a lot more as we gather more data, and this is pretty cool. This is what I'm kind of most excited about right now. Is we're gathering so much intel and, like, data points on every single worker that we're developing, like, macroeconomic reports about the state of like the worker supply in a particular, like, say Austin. We just came out with a report. We can tell you everything about them there because we have a statistically significant portion of the population. But that can help construction companies know, like, where do we need to train people? Where is there a glut of experience and abilities? So it's just like, it's something that creates wins for everybody. And, the world is, everything's gonna get solved by AI, but at the end of the day, we all need to be able to, flip the lights on, flush the toilet, and, have a roof over our heads. And construction's not going anywhere. It has a lot of problems to solve. So that's it.
Cool.
Yeah.
And which barbecue to bring to a job site? We are at time. Sorry. We're over time. So we have next panel coming up, one on robotics, I think, so shortly. Look forward to seeing everyone around the conference.
Yeah, it's a plenary